Few quick notes on safety and housekeeping before we get started. Take a minute, look at where the exits nearest to you are in case something happens, which will not. Please be advised that this event is being recorded by the Center on Faith and Justice, and portions of the audiovisual recording may be broadcast at a later time. Your entry into this area constitutes your consent to being filmed and photographed and or video recorded by us while present in this area. So by entering into this area, you grant consent to the event organizers to be broadcast, including your voice and or likeness. Thank you for coming to this session. As a quick note on our speech and expression policy, Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speaker all the time, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speaker and our organizing group to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. Towards the end of this event, there will be a time for audience Q&A session during which you may find the microphones on either side of the aisles and ask your questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question and be brief, and we ask that each person only ask one question and keep questions relevant to the topic of this event. So thank you so much for being here, and we're gonna go ahead and get started.
That was Lily Kennedy from our team at the center. Thanks, Lily. Good morning. I know some of you might have had class, but senators vote at night, you see, so that's why Sen Warnock wanted to come this morning. Everyone here knows that we are in a political crisis. We don't just know it, we feel it every day. See nodding heads already, we feel it. However, we must also understand that it isn't just a political crisis, it's also a spiritual crisis. And we want to look at that today. We have the right person, the right guest who understands the underlying spiritual, moral issues. But I just want to say welcome and thanks for joining us for this conversation. It's a conversation taking place in the heads of all my students, many of you here, so we're grateful for your presence. I'm Jim Wallace. I'm the founder and faculty director of the Center on Faith and Justice at Georgetown University. I'm a chair at McCourt, right here, named after one of my mentors, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It's joy to welcome you to another installation, just talking to the center about this, of what we call higher calling, where we have political leaders come and talk about how their faith, their ethics, their moral conscience shape their public engagement, how they bring faith into it. So we are gathering at a critical time. We are nearing a year of this Trump administration, and we are being defined by deep division and rising threats seemingly every day to democracy. Truth itself is under assault, and too many leaders seek power by stoking fear, resentment, and even violence. We're watching voting rights rolled back, inequality deepen, and the most vulnerable in our communities being targeted and pushed further to the margins. And many, especially many young people, many of my students here, are asking whether public life has a moral center at all, whether there's even any moral center possible. So that's why today's conversation matters. Our work at the Center on Faith and Justice, rooted in belief that faith and morality must call us to public responsibility, to justice, to truth-telling, to bridge building, and to the protection of human dignity for all of God's children. All of us. So we're honored to welcome a leader who embodies that call. I've known Raphael Warnock for a long time, back when he was the pastor at Ebenezer Baptist, which he still is, pastor, reverend there, was often preached at his church, Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta, and it's a blessing to me that he's still a pastor. First of all, a reverend, who happens to be a senator at the same time. So, because of his being a reverend, he brings something different to this conversation. You'll hear a lot about Jesus' teaching to protect the least of these immigrants, the stranger, it says in the text, particularly brown and black immigrants who are under attack. He is the junior senator from Georgia and the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the spiritual home of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Raphael Warnock is a moral voice and a living witness to what courageous leadership can be, what it looks like in a time of crisis. His advocacy for voting rights, for health care, human dignity has shown what it means to hold political power with moral purpose. Say that again. Hold political power with moral purpose. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock.
Well, thank you all so very much. It's wonderful to be here again at Georgetown University, and specifically at Georgetown University Center on Faith and Justice. And it's always good to be with my friend, the Reverend Jim Wallace, a man who exemplifies faith in action, who moves from one position to the next, but he's always on the same assignment, the embodiment of God's love and God's justice in the world. Give the Reverend Jim Wallace a round of applause for his work and his witness. I'm always a little nervous when I'm around Jim because he always finds a way to make sure we're getting into some good trouble. And if you stick too close to him, you might get arrested, but always for a good reason. Back this summer when folks were working to pass the big ugly bill, Jim Wallace brought a multi-faith coalition to the steps of the Capitol so that we could speak with one voice in all of our various faith traditions, that we could say together that the acid test of your faith is the depth of your commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. In various ways, all of our great faith traditions have some version of what we in the Christian tradition call the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's in Jewish tradition, it's in Hindu tradition, it's in Islamic tradition. All of the great faith traditions say that in some way. And so I was proud to stand with Reverend Wallace and many others to say to this administration, as they are trying to do more, to fire thousands of dedicated federal workers, that we will not be silent as they are trying to do more than kick working people off SNAP and Medicaid. They're doing that, to be sure. Thousands of federal workers. And when we talk about federal workers, we really are talking about the covenant we have with one another as an American people. Federal government is not some third person, some entity out there somewhere. The first words of our Constitution are the creed, the American creed, we the people. And these are the ways in which we organize ourselves to do the things for each other that we cannot do alone. And so they're attacking federal workers. This business of pulling the people who are SNAP recipients in the recent fight around the government shutdown is a kind of cruelty for which I cannot find adequate words. We were in a fight, to be sure, and I'm not asking you to take a position on who is right, Democrats or Republicans. Obviously, I'm in a party. But I was a pastor a long time before I was in a party, and I know cruelty when I see it. And there was no reason to drag the SNAP recipients into this fight. They were to be the beneficiaries of a contingency fund. And the administration decided we wouldn't use it. We wouldn't use the contingency fund because we would be better off politically to use poor people as pawns in a political fight. And now that the shutdown is over, we heard the Secretary of Agriculture, out of which we get SNAP, say this weekend that maybe we ought to ask everybody to reapply. What is with this making pawns and playthings out of poor people? And I want you to think about that because in a real sense, I think it bespeaks a deep kind of spiritual crisis in our nation, which we're seeing come to a head in these moments. But if we're honest, it did not begin with this administration. There is no sugarcoating it. These are dark days. These are tough times. And I think maybe a strange thing for someone in elected office to say, but I think that the puny language and vocabulary of partisan politics is not adequate to the task. That what ails us is deeper than that, even as we engage in the process. America is struggling with a spiritual crisis. There is a deep sense in this country in which we all realize that something is not right. People on the left and people on the right see that. We all know that there's something that's not quite right. Have you ever awakened in the morning and you just didn't feel too good? Anybody? This is what we do in the Baptist church. Talk back to me. You ever just wake up and you don't feel that good, and you can't quite put your finger on it. You know, it's the symptoms are not all that obvious. You just kind of, and then you later discover, after stumbling around a bit, that you have a low-grade fever. And so it's a bit, nondescript, but you just kind of don't feel great. That's how I talk about our country these days. I think America has a low-grade fever. And we've had that for a long time. Over the last decade or so, in fact, if we're honest, it's a fever that has transcended Democratic and Republican administrations. And that fever is caused, I believe, by a broken political system, a rupture in the creed that we share as an American people, first three words of the Constitution: we the people. The system that has failed to put the needs of the people first. Over the last 50 years, wages have been stagnant for many, and the price of everything from health care to housing to education has become more expensive. People are working harder and harder and seeing less and less for the work that they're putting in. And young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home. Older people are wondering if they'll ever be able to retire with dignity. Workers are seeing themselves create wealth for others, yet after creating all of that wealth for others that they can clearly see on the NASDAQ, that wealth is not trickling down, and they can barely get by. And decades of this low-grade fever, stagnant wages for ordinary people, the inability to grasp the American dream, basic human dignity. And then on top of that, 20 years of what felt like an endless war. And then a pandemic that killed 1 million Americans. That's a lot of empty seats around the kitchen table. And I think because we've had to go through it and keep moving, we have not, Jim, taken stock of really what's happened to us. But to put it in perspective, and I'm trying to remember when most of you all were born, but in 2001, I can tell you that our country felt what happened on 9/11 was a sacking of the American conscience and our sense of ourselves. We lost 4,000 people. This pandemic, 1 million people. On top of all of this increasing wealth inequality. And so decades of this low-grade fever left untreated has brought us to where we are today, a nation in crisis, a nation that has become disconnected from the values that make us who we are, a nation where we no longer see our neighbors as crucial to our own success, but as competitors in a competition for scarce resources. These deficits in a wealthy nation and on a plentiful planet speak to a spiritual deficit that at its core is a lapse in the covenant that we have with one another. In other words, people feel out of control of their lives. They're lonely, they feel helpless, they feel broken. And here's the thing. Politicians have been channeling that anger instead of trying to heal us into short-term political gain. If people cannot believe in the promise of opportunity, they choose then to put their faith in strong men who say the country's in a mess because they rightly see the vulnerability that people feel. But then after that diagnosis, the strong man says, I'm the only one who can fix it. And the preacher, who happens to be a senator, has to ask himself, where was God Almighty? What was God Almighty in heaven thinking when he heard this mere mortal say, I'm the only one who can fix it? And so this channeling of anger for short-term partisan purposes is what we're dealing with now. And so it's why we are caught up in the throes of the politics of rage, anger, division, and fear. It's why we see immigration raids near schools and churches. All of that work is doing something other than the obvious. It's why we see armed and masked officers and members of the military inciting fear in American cities. It's why you see uniformed folks landing in Black Hawk helicopters, rappelling down buildings in the middle of an American city. Think about the imagery and the iconography. Somebody's trying to convince us that we are at war with one another. And then that creates the context in which you can then move wealth from the bottom to the top. Socialism for the rich. Robin Hood in reverse. 15 million Americans lost their health care. It was called waste, fraud, and abuse. What are you saying about those Americans? 22 million Americans will see their health care premiums double on average. Waste, fraud, and abuse. What are you saying about those people? They're trying to convince us that we are at war with one another. In fact, the president stood before our generals and spoke in no uncertain terms about what the enemy within. Be afraid of politicians who tell you to be afraid of one another. And so the president's ascendance, to me, is symptomatic of a nation that is broken and in the throes of a spiritual crisis. We have to ask what kind of country gives birth to that and says yes to that a couple of times. And so in this way, creating the economic conditions for human thriving, I believe, is part of the spiritual work that we must do. It is holy work. It is why I am engaged in politics. If you're wondering, how is it that a pastor is engaged in something as messy as politics? It's because I believe in the incarnation. It is the manger in the messiness of human experience. And every now and then I get to do something amazing, like cap the cost of insulin for seniors to no more than $35 of out-of-pocket costs. That changes somebody's life. This is spiritual work. It is about restoring the covenant that we share with one another. And so, as I close, and nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says, as I close, you're not only looking at a United States senator. You're not just looking at the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. But you're looking at someone whose life is a testament to the transformative power of us leaning into we the people. I know what good public policy can do. Long before I had a PhD or a Senate seat or a pulpit made famous by Martin Luther King Jr., I was a Head Start kid. Somebody gave a preschool age kid a chance by stirring in me a love for learning and dealing with the word gap that poor kids often suffer from. That aided and abetted by parents who were poor, but they had good sense. They bought me a set of World Book encyclopedias. I think we were the only ones in the projects who had a whole volume of World Book. Y'all don't know what that is, you just Google everything. World Book encyclopedias. Then Pell Grants and low-interest student loans enabled me to make my way through Morehouse College. I just wanted to go to the school that Dr. King attended. I'm a product of us keeping faith with the covenant that we have with one another. And I know that all of our children can succeed if we give them a chance. And so in closing, here's what political opponents all have in common. Here's what mortal enemies have in common. We all love our children. Almost all of us love it. We all love our children. We love our children. And part of the spiritual work that we have to do through public policy is enable each other to look into the eyes of other people's children and see our own. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Dr. King said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. I was hungry and you fed me. I was sick. I was in prison. You visited me. I was a stranger. You attended to me. You welcomed me. When were you hungry? When were you naked? When were you sick? Basic spiritual needs that the Savior sent us. He said, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. I hope to be among those voices summoning all of us to that higher calling.
So my students, if they were to say, what's the word they most often hear in class, it's proximity. Proximity. And you're a Head Start kid. That's proximity.
Right.
And what I've always loved about you is that I think, in my opinion, a lot of senators don't have a lot of proximity to people who are on the edges or margins. But you have the proximity of you have the bedside manner of a pastor. So you've been at people's bedsides when they have all these things happen to them.
Right.
So things happen to people, and a pastor has to respond. That brings proximity. So the question I have to start with is, you've laid out, I think, eloquently the spiritual crisis we're in. Are there spaces and places on Capitol Hill with your colleagues, Senate colleagues or members of the House, where that can be talked about? Yeah. Is this
with
being
each other or
talked
with?
Starting with each other. And let's take the second part of that. And how many of them are willing to talk about this more broadly with their constituents? But starting with, I often wonder what people like you do every day in Capitol Hill.
Me too.
But with your colleagues, you know, how you talk about these things, and whether there are any spaces and relationships.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the question, and you're absolutely right. Proximity is so very important. Brian Stevenson, who is an incredible moral voice in our country, talks a lot about proximity. And Jesus embodied it. He was always touching folk you weren't supposed to touch. Literally, you weren't supposed to touch lepers. And so he hung out with them. He was among the sinners and the folks who were seen as other. Those are the people Jesus centered. And so I do think that my work as a pastor provides for me a particular kind of lens for my work as an elected official. I celebrated this fall my 20th year, believe it or not, at Ebenezer. I've been the pastor of Ebenezer for 20 years. And over the course of those 20 years and the years before that serving other churches, I've spent a lot of time, you mentioned bedside manner, literally so. I've spent lots of hours at the bedside of sick people. Yeah. And in waiting rooms with their families, sometimes when they've had to make the toughest decisions about what to do. And so that's the lens through which I fight for health care. I was fighting for health care long before I came to the Senate, trying to get Georgia to expand Medicaid. I'm still in that fight. But I do think it's important, particularly in this moment where we are witnessing politicians who are trying to divide us, that we have to be intentional about finding spaces and places to spend time with people with whom we disagree most of the time. And so I've tried to do that. We have gatherings. There's a bipartisan lunch that Senator Coons and I and a couple of others have been doing now for years. Johnny Isaacson, who was my Republican predecessor, I sit in the seat that he held, he started it. And I almost always disagreed with his politics, but he and I were actually friends. He used to come to my church when just as he was my senator. And he would come to Ebenezer, and I always was impressed with Johnny Isaacson. Again, I disagree with him politically. Here's why I was really impressed with him. He would always come to the Martin Luther King Jr. ecumenical service at Morehouse on King Monday. And that service is, on average, almost 4 hours, and he would stay the whole time. That endeared me to him, because most politicians would come and say hello, and then they'd sneak out. He would stay there for 4 hours. But he started that bipartisan barbecue. It's something that I continue in his honor and in his memory. And then every now and then, believe it or not, I find ways to work with my Republican counterparts while holding on to my values. There's some things that I'm clear about where I am. But even when you disagree, there are always things you can find that you can work on. I'll give you one example. I worked with Senator Braun, who's now governor, on making railroad crossing safer for children. There are literally kids in our country who have to decide, are they going to go over the train or under the train to get to school? Mm-hmm. So we worked on that problem together. I've worked on a range of things with Republicans. Ted Cruz and I
All right, sure.
even did an amendment together in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He and I disagree almost all of the time. When I was on the Commerce Committee with him, sometimes, he would be talking, and I'm like, really? And I know why, you got dressed to come here to say that. That's interesting. But when we were working on a bipartisan infrastructure bill, as it turns out, it was something that he wanted done that I also wanted done. And we couldn't get it done in committee. We had to get it done on the floor of the Senate the night that bill was passed. And Ted stood up on his side of the aisle and began to say why he thought the Senate should do this thing. And then I stood up on my side of the aisle, and I heard myself say words that I never thought I would say. I'd like to associate myself with the words from the senator from Texas. Said it real fast. And all of our colleagues were laughing, and they couldn't believe it. But they passed it unanimously. They say, well, Ted Cruz and Raphael Warnock agree with it. It's got to be pretty good. And they passed it. I don't know if they knew what was in it, but they passed it. It was just this little thing. We were trying to get this highway built out that runs through Georgia and Texas. We can get that highway built, I-14. Doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to go to church or trying to go to the temple or trying to go to mosque. Everybody needs to get on that same road. And so we need to get on that road, all of us, in a deeper sense, that runs through our humanity and find ways to find common cause with one another.
So the fact that you all vote at night and the afternoons brought you here this morning, and we got classes going on here, so it's great to see so many students. And you won't be surprised to hear that a lot of students that I talk to here are very disillusioned with the political system. Don't think they can make a difference, don't think their activism matters, and so they care about these questions, but they're really skeptical, I guess, of the systems, the broken system. What's your word to them about how, in fact, they do and can make a difference even with that broken system?
Yeah. Disillusionment is the seed for renewal and innovation. I get worried when and that's Jim. I appreciate because he's raising the question. This is not at all what he's doing, but I get concerned when people like us chide young people for being impatient. We need that impatience. There's a kind of idealism that comes with youth and a kind of restlessness, and we need it. So I don't want your disillusionment to become despair. But you know, when people create something, when you create a new system, when you create a new way of doing things, that renewal always comes as a result of being disillusioned with what you saw. You know, anybody in here, if you pursue a PhD in whatever field, in some ways, mine is in systematic theology. Everybody who sits down and writes a dissertation in that way, the argument is, here's what the other folk got wrong, and here's how I'm going to correct it. That's the beginning of the theme. These are the gaps. This is what they're missing, and then you go and you do your work. So go and do your work, and recognize that you can make a contribution. I mean, I only get concerned when that disillusionment just causes you to go into a corner somewhere and do nothing. But do the work. Point out the ways in which we're getting it wrong. And know that you have a voice and that you can make a difference. I think sometimes we look at the people in the civil rights movement, for example, and we forget how young they were. Dr. King never saw 40. When John Lewis was crossing that bridge, I think he was 23 years old. And one of the things that inspires me these days is how he got on that bridge in the first place. They had passed the Civil Rights Bill into law, 1964 Civil Rights Law. Dr. King and his lieutenants went to see President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And because Dr. King was always focused on the next thing, he didn't spend much time on what they had just done. He said, you know, good to see you, Mr. President. I need a voting rights law. He said, my people can't vote. It's been 100 years since we passed 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and black people are largely disenfranchised, can't vote. And LBJ began to say, Martin, I can't get that done right now. I just passed the Civil Rights Bill. I had to use all the political capital I could muster to get that through the Dixiecrats and get that done. I can't pass a voting rights law now. The president kept saying in various ways, and it's Andy Young who relayed this story to me. He said, I can't get that done right now. I just don't have the power to do it. I don't have the power. They left the meeting and the staff was feeling all demoralized and dejected, disillusioned with politics. And they said to Dr. King, what are we going to do? He's the president of the United States. He says he doesn't have the power to do it. And Dr. King, with the swag of a Morehouse man, you'll understand that one day, just sort of squared his shoulders. And he said, well, if the president doesn't have the power, I guess we'll just have to go and get him some. I love that.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, he's just a preacher, right? He doesn't have a political office. He doesn't have the military. He doesn't have, you know, he's just a Baptist preacher. He said, if the president doesn't have the power, let's go and get him some. And so that's what Selma is about.
That's what Selma's about. Right.
Selma is literally ordinary people going to get the people in power some power in order to do what they needed to do for the people. Mm-hmm. And so it's not about the people in power. It's about the power that's in the people. And at the center of all of those movements, the civil rights law that got passed prior to that, who was at the center of those marches in Birmingham? Children, young people, some elementary school aged. So take that disillusionment, take that rage that you have with things as they are, that disappointment, and channel it into change.
We got 2 mics here, and they're for questions from you all. And I love the way you related disillusionment, not to despair, but to change, which has always happened that way,
Right.
from the outside. And Andy told me that same story. He loves to tell that story. And he said, Johnson said it would be 6 years
Before we could do it.
before we could do it, the Voting Rights Act.
They did it in, I think, less than 6 months.
6 months, yeah. So what happened on the outside changed 6 months to 6 years.
And that's
Okay.
what we need in this moment.
That's right.
Because everywhere I go, people are literally saying to me, as an elected official,
Yeah.
save us. I was walking in a parade and people literally came out off the sidewalk and they came over, and I was I'm glad to meet you, shake your hand. Then they would literally kind of hold on to me and say, please, because there's so much fear out there, save us. And I get it. But here is the thing, I'm going to do all that I can because I believe in this work and I believe in America. But you cannot, hear me, you cannot outsource democracy.
Right.
You can't outsource democracy. You have to, citizenship is what makes democracy work, and you have to think about the ways in which you can create the conditions for the change that you want to see.
How about here? Go ahead. And tell us who you are.
And where you're from, if
And
you're
where
in
you're from.
Georgia.
Gotcha. Good morning, Senator Warnock. Thank you so much for coming to speak. My name's Chaz Torres. I am a Georgia resident, went to North Atlanta High School, so grew up in Atlanta.
Right.
It is home for me. And I had a question. Want to hear your thoughts and your comments on kind of specifically with Georgia, the Christian and religious landscape in Georgia. So, one thing that you said today was about how the U.S. is struggling with a spiritual crisis. And I've heard that before in my home church from my parents who grew up at Church of the Apostles with Dr. Michael Youssef, Passion City Church with Ubi Giglio, and they say very similar words that you say. However, on the political spectrum, they're very far right. So I am just curious on your thoughts with the Georgia landscape of it being a very strong religious state and how there's kind of division politically between, right wing and left wing. However, they're saying the same thing, but they can't find resolve. So what are your thoughts on kind of the landscape there? And then how would you propose we navigate that system and trying to kind of bring the people together?
Great.
So my faith centers the most marginalized members of the human family, and that's not something I'm making up. I'm taking it straight from Jesus and his description of why he came. In his very first sermon, Luke chapter 4, he lifts up words from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. And that's something you hear a lot, right, in a place like Atlanta. Next line, because he's anointed me. And everybody talks about, somehow the anointing, right? And they talk about it in very mysterious ways. It's just this thing that's hovering somewhere. He said he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. So for me, the test of that declaration is the depth of your commitment to the poor. And the irony is that we're living in a moment where too many Christians are angry with poor people rather than being angry about poverty. And literally mad with poor people. And the data shows this. The data shows that it's Christians, and we need to wrestle with that. It's Christians, telemarketers. It's Christians who are more likely to blame poor people for being poor than almost anybody else in the country. So what is it that's in our theology? I'm not going to single out any particular your church or whatever. You do your own homework, right? But what is it about our theology that makes us so quick to blame victims, to blame poor people for being poor, rather than challenging the broken and systems that literally rob from the poor? This big ugly bill literally is the largest transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top that we've seen in American history. The church should be leading, should be the strongest and most vociferous voices outraged by that. And if that's not the case, then what is it about our theology that makes us okay with that? So I'm not convinced by what you say, I'm convinced by what you do.
So in that text, the good news that
Good news.
it's evangel, that's the word
Right.
in the text,
Right.
from which we get evangelicalism,
Right.
But any gospel isn't good news to poor people.
It's not the
Is
gospel.
not the gospel of Jesus. Yeah, here, please.
Hi, I'm Isabel Carr. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm from Midtown. I'm a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences studying pre-health studies. And I was wondering, and thank you so much for coming, Senator Warnock. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what role young researchers and scientists can play in rebuilding public trust after the pandemic.
Are you specifically in public health, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, great, great. So first of all, hats off to all of our folks who were engaged in the holy work of public health. I love our public health workers. I've been there literally on the lines with the CDC workers, on the protest lines with them, just so that they could feel my solidarity even as I do the work in the Capitol. I think the assault that has happened on public health is awful. And if you followed me at all, you know that I've been very vocal about this. I think Robert Kennedy needs to resign. He is manifestly unfit and unprepared for the job. And, I got elected in the throes of the pandemic. I came to this work while we were in COVID. And as there were those who were literally trying to divide us, we're in a spiritual crisis. Our politics is broken when we're literally in a partisan fight about a virus. I want you to think about that. Literally, a virus became the domain for a political fight. So the science has gone out the window at that point. So part of what I was saying, even as I was running as a candidate, is that my faith has no quarrel with science. And, I continue to do everything I can to stand up for our public health system. I'm proud that the CDC is in Atlanta. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that work. We're going through this season, but don't give up on the work that you're doing. Keep doing that research. It matters. It is part of what has made this country great. I'm deeply concerned about the assaults on NIH. A lot of this work, you really need the resources of government to bolster. Because when the early research that happens for the disease and research that happens, that early research, there's no business model to support that. Even your venture capitalists, they're not going to get in at that point, right? And so that's important work that we do as a country. It makes a huge difference, and I think it is foolish for us to cede that space to others. And I'll be doing everything I can to encourage you to do that work, but keep it going. All right?
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I see another student here. I'm going to take that student, then come back over here. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Warnock. It's so nice to meet you. My name is Megan Klingler, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta's
in the house.
Taking over the building.
One thing I've noticed recently in our public discourse is sort of a reduction in the respect of how we talk to each other and how we treat our politics. And I know some Democrats have suggested that we need to mirror that intensity or ferocity because there's so much frustration with the system. And my question is, as Christians who are supposed to treat each other with respect, how do we counter this dangerous language or this aggressive language in a way that more closely aligns with our faith?
Yeah. Words have power, and so we have to be thoughtful about how we use them. I don't want to condemn rage because there is something to righteous indignation. Mm-hmm. The prophets embodied it. Who, by the way, as we were talking about this issue around poverty, there are 2,000 verses in Scripture that tell you how to treat the poor. So I don't, so you have, so that's the test. And so I think there's something to righteous indignation, there's something to truth telling. But I think we have to find ways of doing that without demonizing each other. And for me, it's a matter of recognizing that we're fighting systems. As angry as I am with what Donald Trump represents, I have to come to terms with the fact that 78 million of my neighbors thought that this was a good idea again. So if I focus just on him or even just on this administration, I'm losing sight of the bigger spiritual crisis that I do think attends the body politic in our country as a whole. And the only cure for that really is love. And I don't mean the sweet, sentimental love that doesn't take seriously the fight that we're in, but the kind of love that spurs you into action. The love that Jesus embodied even as he overthrew the tables in the temple, and yet that love poured out to those who were in need. So for me, it's a balance. So no, I don't want to become that which I reject. And I think there's a way to speak with passion, but not with hate.
Great question, great answer. I want to get to, we're running out of time, surprise, surprise, and lots of lines of questions here.
Yep.
I'm going to ask two more, one here and then one over here, and keep them brief.
And I'll try to keep my answers briefer.
I've learned that questions are not sermons. I had to wrestle with that for a while. So here and then over here.
Thank you, Senator Warnock, for being here. My name is Rob Laterza. I'm a grad student in the School of Foreign Service and the business school here. And my question was kind of similar about what to do when that disillusionment with politics turns to despair. I was recently having a conversation with a good friend of mine, and he told me, I am sick and tired of hearing about unity and national healing. I don't want to hear another word about it. So how do you convince people who have given up hope that it is possible and worthwhile for people to come together?
So part of the work that they're trying to do is just that. They are trying to weaponize despair. And I think we've got to really come to terms with that that despair is, they're using it as a weapon. And so we've got to push hard against that. I think you have to be patient with your friend. I can tell you as a preacher that sometimes the last thing people need is a sermon. Who was a great Catholic thinker who said, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. Francis, when people are in that moment, I think really the best thing you can do is proximity, being in the space with that person. And I do think it's important to be a part of a community. This is what church does for us. I think faith communities exist I don't think faith lives in a vacuum.
Right.
You need to be in community. So maybe this is the moment where if you listen behind the words, that sounds like to me someone who is exhausted. And there are moments when I'm exhausted. And just being in community might be the most important thing for that season.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Nsinga Sambo. I'm from Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I'm actually one of the former chairs at the Young Democrats of Georgia, so I'm excited to see you again. We have a lot of our members, like staffing your office and everything, so it's really cool to be here. My question is again about youth involvement in politics. I know last year we saw a lot of that, like that fire and excitement when it came to staffing, volunteering, et cetera, from the youth, but when it came to actually throwing some of us in office, there's a lot of that hesitancy. And I know, again, as we approach a lot of gubernatorial season next year and like Senate district season also next year, we kind of see a lot of that stress or anxiety about whether youth involvement is actually something that we can expect in Georgia. So my question is how you would advise, I guess, young people trying to break into politics, not only from, I guess, volunteering, but actually trying to be able to relay our voices on the Capitol.
We need your voices. And look, I mentioned in my speech that it concerns me that young people wonder if they'll ever be able to buy a home, for example. One of the other things that came out of the big ugly bill, not only was it a massive transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, it was also a massive transfer of wealth from older people, from the young to the old. And so young people rightly discern that there's something amiss and that there's something broken in the politics. Because literally, I mean, you take all of this money away from Medicaid, $1 trillion. You double the health care premiums for 22 million Americans. You take health care away from 15 million Americans, leave rural hospitals particularly struggling. And you attack the SNAP people. And you give billionaires, top 1%, huge tax cuts. So they're literally, who creates all of that kind of misery when you think about what's happening to struggling, ordinary working class people? And add to the national debt. Yep. Traditionally, my friends on the right have said, when we were trying to do certain things that we think help the vulnerable and we think makes sense for the country, oh, we can't afford to do that. We got to cut because of the national debt. Do you understand? They gave billionaires a tax cut and added billions of dollars to the national debt, which is a tax on who? Young people, folks who aren't even born yet. They're the ones who are going to carry that while creating all of this misery. So the last thing we need is for your generation to check out. Raise your voice and scare the heck out of them by actually being registered to vote. If you're not registered to vote, nobody's scared of you.
That's right. So Kathleen, how much time do we have? 30 seconds. Okay. You talked about the long-term fever, which is a broken political system. And I want to encourage students here to name the system as broken. Yeah. We're not here to defend institutions that aren't working. Name it as broken, and then it's people who thought the system was broken that finally were the ones who changed it. Right. Because we're not saying after this administration is done, we should go back to the way things were under Biden or even our friend Obama. We can't go back, right?
Status quo is broken.
We've got to go forward, and that's where young people can help lead the way by saying it's broken and even having some rage about it being broken.
Right.
But then going forward, right?
Right. I agree with that. And this idea that we need to, so we get through this, so we can go back. Anybody who's saying that is not paying attention. It's not been working for a long time, which created the vacuum for what we're dealing with in the first place.
Right. Yep. Well, could you stay for another hour or so? We got more questions here.
Don't encourage me, you know. But thank you all so very much. This has been a real honor. It's great to be back at Georgetown. And to all the young people, especially in the audience, know that I am standing on tiptoe, waiting to see what you will become and what you will do. I can't wait.
The Reverend is waiting.